Hi, everyone. Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, back with another week of track stats to get you the best free resources you can find for Belmont at the Big A and Santa Anita. We have Keeneland coming up and on site next week. So, a lot of great stuff for all the horse players out there. Now, before we get into that, make sure to press that like button and subscribe to the NYRA Bets YouTube channel. By subscribing, you're simply going to be notified when new videos are dropping, and that's going to be helpful because we got a lot coming up this week. We already have an early preview of the Champagne Stakes. I'm going to be joined by Acacia Clement to go over that race in a little bit more detail, as well as the Frisette. We're going to have capping the card for Keeneland, going to have some content for the Breeders' Futurity as well, and then also looking at the ARC that's coming up this weekend over in Longchamp. So we got you covered coast to coast and around the world with some of the best content you're going to find out there. And Track Stats is just another example of that. So listen, Track Stats, if you're not familiar, it's something that is unique to NYRA Bets because it's something that I do as just I enjoy doing it. I've been doing it before I joined NYRA Bets, but I basically track how horses perform and how post-time favorites are performing at different tracks by surface, by distance, by class level. And then I look at how winning trips are working by surface and distance and class level. So it's an opportunity to really dive into data. All of this is free. It's up on the NYRA Bets site and the NYRA Bets app. And every week I share with you some of those insights here on YouTube as well. So let's talk a little bit about what we've seen in terms of Belmont at the Big A and Santa Anita. Obviously, Santa Anita just starting out this past week, only 3 days worth of races, 29 races overall. Belmont at the Big A now well over 100 races, even with the cancellation of the Miss Grillo last week on Sunday, I should say, due to the turf conditions and all of the rain. But what have we seen looking at these two tracks and how post-time favorites are performing? The interesting thing is looking how similar Belmont at the Big A and Santa Anita really look like right now. So in terms of how are post-time favorites performing, a little bit better at Santa Anita. That's not surprising. Usually you do see favorites performing a little bit better out there, 38% basically to about 35.5%. So Belmont at the Big A at that 35% rate. As I've talked about before, you typically like to see tracks in that 30 to 35% range. When you start seeing them creep up to 40, 42, 43, that makes it really hard to play. The nice part about Santa Anita is some of those turf courses, in particular turf races, have had very strong field sizes. So we've seen some really good betting options. And you can see that with the percent of 10-1 winners or higher through just the first 3 days at Santa Anita. 24% of winners were 10-1 or higher. There were a pair of 26-1 winners and a 29-1 winner. So a lot of big prices coming in at Santa Anita and good prices coming in at Belmont as well, with 15.4% of belt winners during Belmont at the Big A being 10-1 or higher. Typically, you like to see that number. I usually like to see it 12 to 15%. Anything above that is really gravy, I think, as a horse player. So as long as you're getting that, 10 to 12 to 15% of 10-1 or higher winners, it gives you confidence that you can find some of those long shots. Now, I also include the percent of 4-1 and under. So this kind of encapsulates, yes, the favorites, but also how often are basically second or sometimes third choices winning these races, as opposed to genuine long shots. So at Belmont at the Big A, you're seeing about 65% of horses 4-1 and under are winning, or I should say winners, 65% of winners are 4-1 and under. And at Santa Anita, that number's at about 60%. So pretty close. And flat betting the post-time favorite at both tracks yields almost the exact same ROI, 170 at Belmont at the Big A and 168 at Santa Anita. So you would be down roughly the same amount if you just flat bet favorites every single race at either track. Now, a lot of people ask about field size, and field size has a huge impact on the percentage of favorites that are winning, because obviously the larger the field size, the more contested the race tends to be, and the more likely you are to see an upset in some of those races. You see shorter fields, and you tend to see more favorites winning. That's not surprising. There's fewer contenders, and there's a better opportunity for any horse to win, let alone the favorite. So during Belmont at the Big A meet, dirt races have had an average of about 8 entries. Turf races have an average of about 9.5 entries. And then this week was the first week we got hit with some of those off-turf races. We had somewhere between 6 and 7 entries, 6.71 entries per off-turf race. For the meet overall, we're averaging over 8.5 entries per race at Belmont at the Big A. Out at Santa Anita, a little bit lower, and that's particularly because the dirt races just have smaller field sizes out there. Only 6.5 entries per dirt race out there. On the turf, like I said, that's where you're catching some big prices and some nicer fields, a little over 9 entries per race. Of course, they have not had any off-turf races yet, and they're averaging about 8 horses per entry or 8 horses per race out there. So again, not surprising that Santa Anita maybe has a couple point higher favorites winning than Belmont at the Big A. Field size, obviously, a big correlation factor there. But let's also look at how post-time favorites are performing by different levels. So on the left side of your screen, you'll see Belmont at the Big A, and on the right side, you'll see Santa Anita Fall Meet. So what you'll see is those below even money favorites at Belmont at the Big A are winning about 2/3 of the time. At Santa Anita, there's only been 3, and they've all won. Now, I'll say that tends to be the trend out there. When you're looking at West Coast racing, usually when you see a horse below even money, those horses win at an incredibly high rate out west. And some of it is the quote, they knew factor, but a lot of it is you just have Baffert, and sometimes those really heavy favorites are really logical maiden horses, in particular, maiden special weights. That is something to really keep in mind. So you'll see the maiden special weights tends to have a lot of favorites out there. Some of that's a byproduct of just Bob Baffert rolling out some monsters every single day of the meet, and people knowing it. And then the horse goes off at 1-5 and wins for fun. So those sorts of things can happen out there. Obviously, it's not going to stay at 100% as the meet goes on, but it's going to remain a little bit higher than what we see here on the East Coast. Now, you're even to 9-5 favorites here at Belmont at the Big A. It's about 38% of those horses are winning as post-time favorites. Out west, about 35%. So very comparable numbers. And then 2-1 and 3-1 favorites, and 5-2, obviously, that's what's in between those two. But 2-1, 5-2, 3-1 favorites at Belmont at the Big A. We've had 38 of them. They're winning at about a 21% clip, and that's been improving over the last couple of weeks. If you remember the first week, I think it was at 9%, then it went up to 19. Now it's up to 21. So that 2-1 to 3-1 group is doing a little bit better as the meet has gone on. Out west, almost the exact same number, 22%. And this week we did have our first over 3-1 favorite, a 7-2 favorite actually, and the horse did not win, did hit the board, but did not win. So you can see, again, just some of the similarities and differences between how favorites are performing by their level of favoritism between Belmont at the Big A and Santa Anita. Now, let's dive into Belmont at the Big A specifically, and let's look at the distinction between dirt sprints and one-turn miles in terms of winning trip analysis. So looking at the number of horses winning on the lead versus those tracking from within 3 lengths of the pace at the 3/8 or half-mile mark, and those closing from more than 3 lengths off at the 3/8 or half-mile mark. So dirt sprints, we've had 35 of those. And again, speed is the name of the game. 40% of those winners have been gate to wire. 52% have been tracking, and only 8% have closed from more than 3 lengths back at the 3/8 or half-mile mark. Quite simply, you're not making up ground on the main track. And we saw speed be very good over the week, and also inside speed in particular. This is something Andy Serling noted, David Aragona noted. Inside speed was really a cheat code on a lot of days at Belmont at the Big A. So there was definitely a track bias on a couple of those days towards the inside. But speed, even before the track bias, has been the name of the game here at Aqueduct. And we've seen that continue in those one-turn mile races. Yes, technically a route, but same configuration as a dirt sprint in terms of being a one-turn race. And you've seen roughly the same analysis and breakdown of numbers. So a little bit more in terms of gate to wire winners, 50%. So 8 of the 16 one-turn mile winners have been leading at the half-mile mark, and 38% have been tracking, only 12% have been closing. So again, something to keep in mind when you're playing Belmont at the Big A, when you're playing those dirt races. If there's a horse you like that's a deep closer, take a second look and really make sure that they're going to get the pace set up, because otherwise this track is not playing to speed at all. Now let's go and talk about the turf course, which, yes, was yielding on Saturday. And then obviously they were off the turf on Sunday. One of the things, if you go to NYRA Bets, you go to NYRA Bets app or NYRABets.com, you can also see I'll disaggregate off turf races as well. So Off-turf races are their own separate entity, and I do my own analysis of those races. So those are obviously not included here. These are strictly the races that were run on the turf. As we get more off-turf races, that's something I'll start sharing on a weekly basis. But right now, it's a pretty small number overall. But looking at the inner versus the outer turf, and the outer turf playing remarkably fair, basically an even number of leading, tracking, and closing horses. On the inner turf, closers have been doing better. And this has been a trend that we've seen since the very start of the meet, 42% closing from more than 3 lengths back at the half or 3/8 mile marks, and tracking 37% of winners were tracking from within 3 lengths of the pace. Only 21% of winners going gate to wire on that inner turf course. So a little bit more of a closing bias there, or favoring closers on the inner versus the outer, which is, like I said, playing incredibly fair in those 2-turn turf races. Now let's head over to Santa Anita, where I thought there was a speed favoring bias at Aqueduct, and then Santa Anita said, hold my beer. And through the first week, this is exactly what I expect from Santa Anita. It's exactly what I expect from California racing. Just speed, my friends, speed. Dirt sprints, 67% of winners, gate to wire. 33% tracking. Nobody has closed from more than 3 lengths off the pace. Okay. You need to be forward out west. That's just the name of the game. Whether it was Del Mar this past fall or at Santa Anita, you need to have speed. It's something to keep in mind when we talk about track stats coming up for Del Mar and the Breeders' Cup. You need to have speed on these dirt surfaces. Now, in terms of dirt routes, fewer gate-to-wire winners, only 29% gate-to-wire winners, but the tracking trip has been incredibly effective. 5 out of 7, 71% of winners have been tracking from within 3 lengths of the pace at the half-mile mark. Nobody, again, has closed from more than 3 lengths back on the main track, sprinting or routing. What's fascinating is seeing how that has also played out on the turf a little bit. So one of the things I also do is on NYRA Bets and the app, if you go to track stats, you'll see that I also disaggregate for the downhill turf course. So that's why I say turf sprints flat. Okay. So there were 2 races on the downhill. I'm not going to necessarily draw any conclusions based off of 2 races. For those of you who are curious, favorites won both, and one of them went gate to wire. The other one came from off the pace. So not a lot necessarily to be gleaned there. So I wanted to share how the turf sprints are working on the flat surface versus the turf route. 7 races under both through the first week. And in the turf sprints, interestingly, speed of the speed was not king, where you saw horses closing from well off the pace in some instances and horses tracking, both performing very well. Now, what's interesting is over in the turf routes, speed really was quite good. So you wanted to be a forward trip. 43% gate to wire, 43% tracking from within 3 lengths of the pace, and the only horse that closed from more than even 2 lengths off the pace. So this wasn't even 3. I believe there's one horse that I'll mention in a second who closed. Outside of that, the next closest horse to close from off the pace was 1 3/4 lengths off the pace at the half-mile mark. So nobody's even within 2 lengths of the pace. The only horse that closed was your 4 to 5 favorite in the City of Hope, Johannes. That's the only horse that closed from more than even 2 lengths off the pace in the turf route. Obviously showed you can do it, but maybe not the level of horse. You need to have horses that just have that really strong late turn of foot to be able to get there. But you've seen speed be very, very effective out there in the turf route races. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this week on Track Stats. Like I said, if you want to get more information, head on over to NYRA Bets, head on over to the app or NYRABets.com and get more data on Track Stats for Belmont at the Big A and Santa Anita. Like I said, we're going to start with Keeneland this coming week. We're going to have that added for next week, obviously, once they run their first week and opening week races. We'll continue to update Belmont at the Big A and Santa Anita. I'm also going to have some very special track stats looking at how the Breeders' Cup has been playing at Del Mar, specifically since they've been hosting it the last couple of years. So looking at some of that data, crunching those numbers, sharing that with you all. And then going into the winter, expect Gulfstream Park Championship meet, Turfway Park, and more. Okay, we got you covered here. It's the best place to get horse racing and handicapping content here on NYRA Bets. Well, like I said, make sure to like and subscribe. My name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and profitable day at the races and reminding you, friends, it's now Post time.